Romans, they existed. Then some stuff happened, and now they don't. And the people who live in Rome's former heartlands are now called Italians. But when did this change occur? When did the Romans become Italians? Now, the answer to this question is dependent on what your definition of Roman is. Is it a person living in the Roman Empire, people identifying themselves as Roman, speaking Latin, or upholding the ideals of the Roman Empire? If it's living in the Roman Empire, then for the people in what's now Italy, it was roughly 476 that it all came to an end. Sort of. You see, despite them being a part of the brand new Kingdom of Italy, the first one that is, they still had a Roman Senate. In fact, they still had the Roman Senate, would have spoken Latin, and were officially a client state of what was left of the Roman Empire in the East. Many who lived there still considered themselves to be Romans, and Odoacer, Italy's new ruler, referred to himself as being king of both Romans and Goths. Odoacer's successors mostly used the same terminology, but it wasn't long until Emperor Justinian and his trusty general Belisarius came knocking and reconquered Italy on behalf of Constantinople. They held on to it all for about 7 minutes before the Lombards turned up and conquered some and then a lot of the territory of Italy. Importantly, the Eastern Roman Empire still held on to some lands there, which started the long-running political divisions of the Italian peninsula. However, in the territories ruled by the Lombards, the institutions of the Roman Empire, notably the Senate, were abolished, and so began some good old-fashioned absolute feudal monarchy. That said, the idolization of Rome persisted and Roman law remained dominant. After this, the process of change was a slow one. The Lombards maintained control over much of Italy despite making up about 5% of its population for over 2 centuries, and the kings there soon stopped referring to their subjects as Romans but as Lombards. Whilst at first both Roman and Germanic law was used, over time Germanic law became the dominant one. Whereas in the parts ruled by Byzantium, Greek became the language of government, but the people there were still considered to be Romans. That said, there were cultural differences now between the Byzantine Romans and their subjects living in Italy. When religious fervour led to the empire-wide iconoclasm, the destruction of images on religious grounds, the Romans living in Italy didn't bother. When the Franks turned up in the 8th century and conquered most of the peninsula, the people living there were not considered to be Romans by most outsiders. Latin was still the primary language of the region, and over the next 4 centuries it slowly morphed into medieval Italian. So, with Rome done and its identity a thing of the past, when did the people in Italy become Italians? Well, regional identity separated along political lines. Phoenicians, Florentines, Neapolitans, and of course, Romans. But in the sense of living in and around the city of Rome, not being literal citizens of the Roman Empire. It wasn't until the Renaissance that the idea of the people who lived in Italy all being Italians in a much deeper sense started to pop up. This process was a very slow one, but it took off after the Napoleonic Wars. This was when the people living in the Italian peninsula got fed up of all these foreign powers ruling over them and fighting their wars there. And as such, writers and activists started to define what an Italian was and how to build them a nation. Yet, even after Italy was born, many of the people who lived there still saw themselves identified first and foremost by the region of their birth. But for most of the people living in the Italian peninsula, they were Italians, no longer Romans proper, but the successors and bearers of their